Hey everybody. So I'm having this like horrible TE thing, like trying to make a video and then like the sound wasn't working. So I'm going live and then just gonna let it record that way. So welcome everybody out in uh, internet world. This is another majestic INFJ. And for all 10 of my subscribers, welcome back. It's been a while since I made a video, but I was motivated to make one because really it was motivated by the recent passing of Sinead O'Conner. Um, and it got me thinking about the dynamics of the relationships between INFJs and INFPs, because I've had a lot of INFP friends along the years, and there's sort of this funny relationship that INFJs and INFPs have. It's also sort of the classic thing where a lot of people will type themselves and they're not, or have somebody type them and they're not sure if they're an INFJ or an INFP, and maybe this might help narrow it down a little for you as well. Okay. Excuse me for coughing into the screen. I got a cough, so bear with me. So I'm just going to be riffing on this INFP INFJ relationship, and how I think the cognitive functions, and in particular their sort of ordering, their stacking, will drive this relationship. It's what they refer to as the quasi-identical relationship in the socionics world. Apologies if I get that wrong. I get a lot of the socionic stuff wrong because I'm not that in tune with it, but feel free to correct me in the comments. I know you will. Okay. So Sinead O'Conner, to me, is just the classic INFP. And I try not to get too into, trying to type celebrities, even though, we all do it and it's all fun and everything. But I understand the limitations, because, when it comes to celebrities, a lot of times they're actors or performers, and we tend to type them as the characters that they're performing as, right? And to me, they're all ESFPs or ENFPs, and they're just acting like something else. But every once in a while, you get like a real INFP or real INFJ or something. But Sinead O'Conner, there's no mistyping her. I mean, if we can't agree that Sinead O'Conner is the classic INFP, then we might as well just, give it all up, and go on our ways, because we're just not going to see eye to eye on any of this stuff. Because she just, embodies the INFP, and I'm going to give some examples of why I think that is. But and in addition to sort of talking about her INFP-ness, I want to use this as sort of an example to talk about why there's this weird, I don't want to say, we don't really butt heads, INFJs and INFPs, but there is sort of this weird dynamic that pops up quite a bit when INFJs and INFPs interact, at least in my experience. But to do that, we sort of need to sidetrack here and talk about two of the functions that really come out of the socionics world. And I'm going to sort of assume you have a general baseline of what the personality types are and what the different function stacks are. But in particular, there's the ignoring function and there's the demonstrative function in socionics. And what they are, it'd be TI terminology. The the ignoring function is going to be your fifth slot. So it's basically the opposite direction of whatever your dominant function is. So for those of you who are INFJs, your dominant function is introverted intuition. And so the ignoring, what they call the ignoring function, is going to be extroverted intuition. And we'll talk about what all that means in a second here. And then for the demonstrative function, that in MBTI world, that's going to be in your sixth slot. And so that's going to be the opposite of what's in your second function or your auxiliary or tool function. So again, if you're an INFJ, your tool function, second function is extroverted feeling. So your, excuse me, demonstrative function is going to be introverted feeling. And sometimes you'll hear this referred to as like the critical parent function coming out of, BB's terminology. Okay, so let's talk about what those functions are and then point out or talk about how there's an interesting dynamic and sort of structural asymmetry between INFJs and INFPs when it comes to these functions. And I think this explains a lot of the dynamics between the two types. Okay, so starting with the ignoring function. So again, this is your fifth slot function, and it's the opposite in direction-wise of your dominant function. So for INFJs, it's going to be extroverted intuition. So your ignoring function is actually it's a function that you actually can do really well. And it doesn't take a whole lot of attentive energy to sort of drum it up and to use it. But the problem is we tend to ignore it because we're focused so much on the introverted intuition. We want to ignore the extroverted intuition because they sort of conflict with each other in meaningful ways. And so let me give you some examples. If you think of introverted intuition, as I do, as being basically the source of your pet ideas, right? It's having knowledge without direct experience. And so it's pattern recognition, it's forming associations, forming analogies, and coming up with some sort of universal truth or some sort of nugget of knowledge or some sort of pet theory or some observation or explanation or description of the world or events that you didn't directly experience and nobody actually told you, but you, in your mind's eye, just sort of pieced everything that you know about the world together and come up with this sort of observation or this theory about the world, right? And again, I like to refer to them as your little pet theories. And so one way of thinking about it is taking all the information and filtering out the unnecessary stuff and funneling in the necessary and relevant stuff, and then sort of tying that together and creating some sort of pattern. And you'll fine tune it along the way. You'll take out things that work, you'll fine tune it, refine it, make it a little bit more adaptable, whatever along the way. Your pet theory will change, but you're not going to change it too much, right? Like you like your pet theory. And then the opposite of that is extroverted intuition. And opposite's kind of opposite can mean different things in different contexts, but directionality wise, we're talking opposites here, right? So extroverted intuition is thinking about all the possibilities that could be, right? All of the different scenarios that could unfold given a certain set of facts, given a certain set of circumstances, right? Where the introverted intuition is trying to say, look, this is what it is, this is what it will be, given this set of facts and given this set of circumstances, here's my pet theory of what's going to happen, or here's my pet theory of what did happen along the way and how we got here, or my pet theory about, this is just the way the world works, right? Given these facts and circumstances. Where the extroverted intuition, they don't like to, or that function doesn't like, we're going to ascribe some feeling to it, but it doesn't like to compartmentalize things. It doesn't like to put things into a box and say, this is the way it is. It wants to think about all the different scenarios and all the different possibilities. So one sort of real world example of thinking about the difference here is, imagine you're an introverted intuition dom and you're walking along the street with your best friend who's an extroverted intuition dom, and they say intuition is basically the ability to see around corners, right? So you guys are walking down the street, you're coming up to a big corner of a building, and the introverted intuitive, they take all the facts and circumstances and come up with an idea of what will be around the corner, right? We can't help it. It's just the way our brain works. And it's just automatically in constant flow unless we tell it to stop, right? So we're going to approach that corner with some sort of idea of what we really do think is going to be around the corner, right? Given where we are in the situation. The extroverted intuitive, yeah, they could do that, but if you ask them, they're probably going to think of all the things that could be around the corner, right? All the different possibilities that could be there, all the different scenarios that could unfold, right? That we poor introverted intuitive DOMs aren't thinking of, right? So, so that's sort of, to me, a good way of thinking of the difference there, right? So when you're an introverted intuitive dominant, with your, you want to put your extroverted intuition into, what they describe it as, like basically putting it into a box or putting it into a cage. And you can use it, but you only want to use it selectively when you need it. Now, if you think about it, if you're trying to come up with some pet theory or some observation about the world or how an event will unfold, you're going to want to go to that box and open it up and allow your extroverted intuition to sort of unfold and think of various scenarios and everything. But you're going to get enough information out of there that you need, and then you're going to close the box. And then you're going to go back into your introverted intuition and come up with what you think is the most realistic or probabilistic or best explanation of what happened or what's going to happen or how things work, right? So you do need that extroverted intuition to sort of give yourself some space to explore and give yourself some possibilities. But that introverted intuition is going to filter out all the stuff you think is irrelevant and come up with an answer. And so when they call it the ignoring function, that's what they're talking about, is the fact that, you can use it. You can use it if you need to turn it on, and you're actually probably very good at it. But you're going to turn it off when it's not necessary, right? When you're just sort of humming and drumming along in the world, driving in your car, standing in the shower, making YouTube videos, your introverted intuition is probably kicking at high speed, and you're refining all of your ideas and, trying to come up with the best explanation of whatever problem you're working on, right? And your little pet theories. And you'll only open that box when your pet theory might be challenged and you got to take in new information, or you're coming up with something completely new that you've never really, thought about or focused on. Okay. And of course, if you're dominant extroverted intuition, it's, sort of the opposite, right? They want to think of all the different possibilities and all the different scenarios, but when push comes to shove and they've got to come up with an answer of what they really do think will happen, sort of a gun to the head situation, then yeah, they'll open up their introverted intuition box, and they'll try to come up with what they think is the best answer. But all things being equal, we'd rather, both types would rather ignore the opposite one, and only use it, sparingly. So that's the INFJ and the ignoring function. Now, the demonstrative function is the sixth function. And in the INFJ, again, that's going to be introverted feeling. So again, the sixth function, we're, every type, they're very good at their sixth function. It is considered, I think, an unconscious function that's sort of just bubbling underneath consciousness, but it'll pop up when you need it. And it isn't really so much as put into a box in the way that your ignoring function is. It's sort of humming along there, but I like to think of it as, instead of ignoring it, we disregard it. Okay. And I think of this function as sort of the eye roll function, right? Whenever you see, whatever type you are, whenever you see somebody using what to you is your demonstrative function, is your sixth function. So whenever an INFJ sees somebody using introverted feeling, we kind of roll our eyes at it. You'll see it described as, it's, again, the sort of the critical parent. It's sort of like, we get it, we understand it, but we don't really think it's that necessary. And we'll sort of disregard it, right? We don't put it into a box and completely ignore it. We just sort of roll our eyes at it and just disregard it. And so the reasoning behind all this is because your second function is your tool function, and your tool function is what you primarily rely on to do things, right, out in the world, to whenever you have a problem to solve or situation come up. This function is sort of the tool you're going to use. And because of that, we put so much emphasis on that we see the, whatever its opposite is being sort of irrelevant, right? Like, yeah, it's there, I get it, but it's kind of irrelevant to the task at hand, right? So let's think of a real world example with an INFJ. So if an INFJ is, let's say you're like, you're at work and you are responsible for putting together a team for some project, right? This is a great FE thing, right? You're doing social navigation, you're kind of dealing with social dynamics, figuring out the hierarchy, who's good at what job, who can you rely on, who's easy to work with, who's not easy to work with, who, all that kind of stuff, that FEs just love to do, right? And so as we're sort of piecing together our team, you might be thinking, hey, Sally is the right person for this particular job. She's the best computer programmer we have, or she's, the most reliable or the quickest, or whatever function she has to fill, she's the best at it. But man, I hate Sally. I really hate Sally. But she's the best we've got. And so we, just have to, disregard, I don't want to say ignore, but disregard the fact that, I don't really like her, but, but she is the best person for the job. Right. And so you could see, the FE or the FI is there. Like, we know what we feel about this particular person, but we're not necessarily letting it influence our decision making, right? Because again, we want to rely on that tool, and our tool is FE, and that's social navigation and getting the job done. And if we let, our feelings sort of get in the way, so to speak, we're not going to get the job done, right? And then when we, if we come across somebody else who it's like, oh man, I really hate Sally, and why did you give her this position, or why did you give her this job? We sort of roll our eyes at that, right? Because to us, the important thing is getting the job done, and we will make accommodations and sort of navigate around obstacles to get whatever it is we need done. Again, it's a social dynamic thing. So it's very FE, but we're going to ignore, personal feelings about it. And when other people raise it, we might kind of roll our eyes. But because we're INFJs, we'll be very accommodating, and we'll be like, yeah, I understand where you're coming from, but, let's look at it from her perspective or from the company's perspective, and this is the best solution, right? Very INFJ way of dealing with that problem. And so you can think of, whenever you're out and about in the world and, doing your FE stuff, whether that's, giving people advice or working in social dynamics and trying to navigate and, create the harmony and build relationships and all that kind of stuff, you might be disregarding your personal feelings towards some things. Now, I mean, if things are completely out of line, yeah, I mean, obviously you're not going to completely like you're not, completely antisocial or anything. Well, hopefully you're not. But it's, all things being equal, as long as it's not, going to completely crush you and your personal value system, you're willing to make some accommodations. Okay. So, so that's the ignoring function and the demonstrative function in the INFJ. Now, with the INFP, it's interesting, and you have to sort of think of this as sort of a grid in your head here, because the dynamics and the structure is sort of this weird mirror image, asymmetrical mirror image of each other, where the INFP, their ignoring function is extroverted feeling, right? Because it's their fifth slot opposite of their dominant introverted feeling. So that's their ignoring function. Where for us, it's our tool function, right? For the INFJ, it's our tool function. And so you can kind of see where this is going, right? We've already got one conflict, right? They are ignoring the function that we typically like to use to solve the world's problems. They tend to ignore it. They'll use it if they need to, but again, sparingly. They put it in a box, and they'll only use it if they need it. And they're certainly going to rely more on their FI than their FE. And then the INFP's demonstrative function is going to be introverted intuition. And again, you can see this conflict, right? So they're not necessarily ignoring it, but it's kind of the function that they roll their eyes at, right? And so you can see the conflict where if you're an INFJ and introverted intuition is your dominant function, the thing that you take the most seriously, and you think it completely it creates the whole framework of the world that you live in, right? And they're just sort of rolling their eyes at it. And we'll talk about some examples. And you're doing the same thing to them, right? Where introverted feeling to them, that is their framework, right? The INFP, I like to think of it as they see themselves as the shining light in the universe, and everybody can come to them, and they will shine their light on them, but they're not going to change for anybody, right? They are the shining light. And if you want to be part of that, then great. But they're not going to, change anything. And that again, introverted feeling is the way that they frame the world, the way that they think about the world. And here we are, INFJs, rolling our eyes at that kind of stuff and disregarding it, right? And you can just imagine, and so you can see the dynamics already, right? Where the INFJ, our little pet theories are everything to us, right? It's what, probably sets off our dopamine system and our reward system when we come up with a really good example or a really good explanation or a really good observation or a really good prediction about how things in the world are going to work, and completely frame our entire personality and the entire way we interact with the world off of that function. And you're talking to an INFP and they're like, yeah, I see it, but it's not necessarily true. Or they just sort of roll their eyes or like, yeah, you and your theory. Okay. Um, so, and then again, the same with the INFJ and the INFP, rolling your eyes at the INFP's feeling stuff. So, so let's talk about some sort of real world examples and interactions here. And I kind of want to go back to the Sinead O'Conner thing because I want to really underscore where the INFP is coming from. And if you're an INFJ, you might not realize this, or you kind of know it because you're an INFJ, but you might not have, thought as deep or, analyzed it as much. And so let's just sort of talk about the INFP and where they're coming from. And then again, see how that's going to interact with the INFJ. Okay, so Sinead O'Conner, for those of you watching this, I'm going to guess you're probably, several years younger than me and probably didn't grow up in the 90s when Sinead O'Conner was like a huge thing. And and this is just like the tale of an INFP, right? Where she got, she was from Ireland. She was very young when she got famous. Her first big song was Nothing Compares to You, which actually Prince wrote. And so a lot of what I say about sort of her artistry and everything, you had to sort of disregard or not think about Nothing Compares to You, because that wasn't exactly her song. However, everybody always talks about how she made it her song. Like she put her stamp on that song. It was sort of a throwaway Prince song that he never really, I think he released it, but, it was never like a big song of his. And then he sort of gave it to her, I think, and she did it and she put her stamp on it, her INFP stamp, right? And so even though she didn't write the words, she didn't write the music or the chords or anything, the way she sang it, the way she expressed it was just classic Sinead, and nobody could have, nobody else could have done that. And so in that respect, she definitely made it her song. But she, with her own songs, again, she's sort of the textbook case of INFPs. And I think it was Dave Superpowers made this observation on one of his videos where he was talking about INFPs and introverted feelers in particular, and talking about how, an introverted feeler, when they write song lyrics, those lyrics are for themselves, for the author. They are not for you. Again, they're the shining light. If you want to relate to them, that's great, but they are writing their lyrics for themselves. And so a lot of times they're just sort of nonsense, or they don't really, I mean, they've got meaning definitely to the person who wrote them, but you have to kind of interpret what they're saying, right? It's not black and white. It's not on the nose. It's very, analogies, and, you have to read between the lines and you might not understand where they're coming from, unlike a lot of pop songs where it's very obvious what they're talking about. Broke up with me and made me feel horrible. And now I'm living life the way I want to live life. And I'm in the club looking all hot. And boy, don't you feel bad. Like that's like the classic pop song, right? And it's very obvious. It's very explicit what they're talking about. Like nobody can misinterpret it once you know what the lyrics are. With the INFP, think of like Radiohead, Sinead O'Conner, REM, a lot of these sort of indie bands. Elliott Smith is another good example, where they're just sort of talking about things and you're like, okay, and you have to sort of put your own meaning into it, and you're sure, and yeah, they might do an interview or something where they explain what they're talking about, but it's still not really going to make a whole lot of sense, right? Because those lyrics are for them, right? And so so if you go back and you look at her work, stuff that she wrote, it's very much like that. And one example that I really like to point out is her song "The Emperor's New Clothes," and I'm assuming she wrote it. Hopefully she did, because I'm trying to use this as a point. But it's real interesting because, first of all, she's just talking to somebody, you, right? Whoever you is, it's like a parent or a boyfriend or somebody who's like trying to tell her what to do, basically. And it starts off where she's like kind of apologetic, like something went wrong, and she's kind of making excuses. She's not really apologizing, but she's just sort of, saying like, hey, I was young, I didn't really know what I was doing, kind of making excuses. And then the song's sort of in three sections. In the second section, she's more like, hey, I did what I did. If you've got a problem with it, that's on you, right? I was honest about it. You asked me, I told you. And if you got an issue, that's on you. Now we're getting a little bit more INFP, right? And then by the time you get to the third verse or the third section, now all of a sudden she's just like, look, this isn't my fault. This is their fault. Right? Classic INFP, right? Where she's got this great line where she says, what does she say? They laugh because they know they're untouchable, not because what I said was wrong, right? Classic INFP. Like, whatever I did was right because I only act according to my own internal value structure and I don't deviate from that. So I know whatever I did was right because it was true to my moral code and values. And if they've got a problem with it or they're laughing at me, it's a problem with them, not me. Right? Classic INFP. Okay. So then, for those of you who don't know the history, she was, notorious and actually sort of lost her fame over this because she was just constantly standing up for what she thought was right, her own political and moral views. And so it started off with like small things, like she boycotted the Grammys. She was nominated for a bunch of Grammys and when she was really popular and really big. And she just was like, I'm not going to the Grammys. She went on a bunch of talk shows to talk about it, but she wouldn't go to the Grammys because she was just like, that's all materialistic bullshit. And I'm an INFP. Well, she wasn't saying she's an INFP, but you can feel it when you watch her. And she's, it's sort of this attitude of like, who is, who are the Grammys? Like, who's the recording industry of America? Who are they to tell people who the best artist is or the best song? Like, that's all materialistic bullshit. That's all just for them to, pat themselves on the back. And I'm just not going to be part of it. Right. And she was like early 20s, late teens, early 20s at this point. And so everybody was kind of like, but, people generally could respect it. It didn't really cause too many problems, but it was like, you can imagine all the ESTJs and ESFJs in the world, sort of looking down at her for not going to the Grammys like you're supposed to. And so then other controversies came up, like there's some concert or festival or something where at the venue they always played the Star Spangled Banner before every show or something like that, and she refused to perform because she didn't want to be associated with the Star Spangled Banner. She was very political, obviously. She had made some comments where she was in support of the IRA in Ireland, Irish Republican Army, which was in the 90s, kind of politically incorrect to be at least, outwardly supporting them. She was Irish, but she believed in their cause. And then, notoriously, and this is really what did her in eventually, is she was on Saturday Night Live, and she did this a cappella version. It was just her singing of Bob Marley's War. I think it was Bob Marley's song. And she sang the song, but she changed the lyrics a bit so that it was about the Catholic Church instead of war and all the child abuse stuff that was going on. And this was sort of mid 90s, where people kind of knew that stuff was going on, but they thought it was pretty, somewhat rare and isolated. And you certainly didn't talk about it in polite company, and you certainly didn't talk about it on live national television. And then not only that, but she had a picture of the Pope on, and that she was holding, and then at the end of the song she just ripped it up on camera and threw it on the ground. And so of course all the ESFJs and ESTJs, and at this point the ISFJs and the ISTJs, are all just like, okay, that's enough. We're not gonna support her anymore. Because even though people might have shared her her views on it, again, it wasn't like they just sort of saw it as a bridge too far, and she just took it too far. And so she sort of fell off the radar after that. And she had all kinds of personal issues, which was unfortunate. And I don't really want to delve into that, but as an artist, the somewhat funny thing is every time they made a movie about somebody like Ireland or some Irish person, she would always show up on the soundtrack. They had to have Sinead O'Conner singing some sort of Irish song. It was just mandatory in the 90s. But other than that, she just sort of fell off, and she was kind of making a small comeback late in her life, but then, unfortunately she ended up passing away. But I want to use this, her sort of her experiences, what she did and what she went through is just sort of the classic explanation of the INFP and where they're coming from, right? And if you're an INFJ and you're dealing with an INFP or interacting with them, you have to sort of look at the world or think about the world the way that the INFP thinks about the world, right? So, we being the INFJs, everybody comes to us for advice, including the INFPs. INFPs love getting advice from INFJs. They just don't listen to us. I'll explain why. But, but as you're out there sort of counseling the world and giving everybody your little, tidbits of advice based off of your pet theories, when you encounter an INFP, things go kind of weird because of this dynamic, this asymmetry in the functions, right? Where, let's just say they're having, some sort of relational problem, like, an ex-boyfriend or a sister that they don't get along with, or a boss that they don't get along with. And the INFJ's advice a lot of times is, well, you just have to understand that your sister is this type of person, and that's the way that these types act, right? It's not you, it's them, and you just have to understand that's just the way of the world, right? You're using your introverted intuition about, this is that type of person. This is a universal truth about this person, and you just have to accept it and navigate around it or try to make accommodations to try to see things from their perspective, blah, 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 right? So we're thinking we're doing this great job. We've got it all explained. All you have to do is look at it the way we're looking at it, listen to us, you'll understand this is that type of person. Your boss is an asshole because he's, this type of person, or he's got this going on in his life. And if you just look at it from this perspective, you can make accommodations and you can navigate in that situation. And so we're using that introverted intuition, and they are, again, they have introverted intuition in that 6 demonstrative slot, and they're just kind of rolling their eyes at it. They're like, yeah, that could be true. They don't necessarily disagree with you. They're not trying to prove you wrong or argue that, you're just completely off base and you don't understand anything. Like, they'll accept the fact that, you might be right about this type of person, but they are using their extroverted intuition tool to address this problem. And to them, it's like, hey, the world is full of possibilities. And you might be right that the person is acting this way because, they've got this going on in their life, or they had, a bad traumatic childhood or something. You might be right, but there's a million other ways that they could be acting. And I want them to act, in this other way. And so whatever little pet theory you have about this person, I'm just going to roll my eyes at it and be like, okay, you could be right, but that doesn't help me. That doesn't solve my situation, because they're framing it in their introverted feeling. Like, this person is not jibing with my values. We are not on the same moral code, and they are doing something that is forcing me to act, or do something that's against my moral code. And it's not me, it's them. Like, they are the ones who need to change. I'm not the one who needs to change. I know my values. I know what I stand for. And again, I'm the beacon of light, and people can come to me if they want, and they're all welcome, but I'm not going to make any accommodations, and I'm not going to change my values for them. And you, Mr. or Mrs. INFJ, yeah, you could be right in your explanation of why this is the case. And you could be right that, you can navigate it using extroverted feeling to make accommodations, to build relationship, to build harmony. But I'm not doing that, because that's going to force me to do something against my introverted feeling. And I'm leaving that extroverted feeling in a box, right? Because I don't need it. I don't need to refine my introverted feeling, because I know how I feel about this situation. And whatever you tell me, Mr. INFJ or Mrs. INFJ, is not going to change that, right? And so, of course, our advice, or our sort of core essence, is like revolving around this introverted intuition. And here they are, just sort of poo-pooing it and being like, yeah, you could be right, but it's not going to change anything. I'm not going to listen. Because there's a whole other world of possibilities, and and even if you're right, they can take a different path and be a different person. And the same, and so then if you look at the flip side, let's just say for whatever reason an INFJ is going to an INFP for advice. I know INFJs have all the answers, so that's probably very rare. But in the rare situation where the INFJ goes to the INFP for advice, it's going to be sort of the opposite sort of dynamic, where the INFP is going to be like, well, how do you feel about this situation? Like, is this person requiring you to do something against your moral code, against what you think is important? And you're like, what moral code? Like, yeah, okay, I've got some values, I've got some moral code, but I'm just, I'm a little bit more pragmatic. I'm just trying to get the job done here. And for whatever reason, I'm running into this brick wall, and I can't get done what I want to get done, right? And yeah, I know how I feel about it and all that kind of stuff, but you're just sort of rolling your eyes at it. And the INFP is like, well, you're never going to be happy. You're never going to be satisfied unless you're doing what's authentic and true to you and true to your values. And the INFJs are like, well, yeah, I get that at some level, but I'm really not going to be happy if I don't get this thing accomplished that I'm trying to get accomplished. And so, so that's sort of the weird dynamic between the two types, and going back to like the Sinead O'Conner thing where, I could just imagine her with, talking to an INFJ friend, right, who's also an artist and is supposed to go to the Grammys, right? And so Sinead's boycotting the Grammys, and she's like, I don't understand how you can go to these Grammys, it's totally against your values and totally against my values and what should be right in the world. And you as a INFJ are like, yeah, I get it. I understand that, this is all bullshit, but it's going to help my career. And, practically speaking, going and sort of making accommodations and interacting with the people that I need to interact with is going to make, my career. And so I'm willing to sort of put aside those, those value judgments, although I agree with you, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm willing to just sort of put them aside and disregard them because they're in my sixth slot, right? And the second slot is way more important and way on overdriving. Now, of course, just like anybody, the INFJ could have an existential crisis. And obviously, if somebody's pushing them too hard against what their internal values are or their internal code, they'll eventually push back. And it sort of pops up, notoriously as sort of the INFJ rage, where people are just like, where's this coming from? But it's like, well, you just pushed me too far. And you're making me do things that I don't want to do. And so yeah. So, I mean, I guess, as you're out there in the world dealing, if you're an INFJ and you're dealing with the INFPs, keep that in mind, right? That you're probably going to come up with what you think is rock solid advice, a rock solid observation about the situation, a rock solid explanation of why this person is the way they are, why they're acting the way they are. And not only that, but little tidbits, little, tactical or strategic ways of dealing with them, where the INFP is just going to be like, yeah, I get it, but I'm not doing it. Right? And you're just like, oh, okay. You're not going to get that as much from the ISFPs because you don't have that weird asymmetry with the introverted intuition. The ISFP is much more likely to listen to you as long as you can give them some rationale of how it matches with their internal value system, or that they'll be okay. But the INFP, yeah, they're just not going to have it. You can give them the best advice in the world, and they're just like, yeah, okay, that I could do that, but there's all these other things I could do too. And not only that, but I need the world to change. I need the world to change, or I need those people to change, because they, again, to quote Sinead's song, they laugh because they know they're untouchable, not because what I said was wrong, right? It's them, it's not me. I am totally in the right. And if you happen to be one of the, hundreds of people out there that's sort of debating between whether you're an INFP or an INFJ, what resonates with you more? Are you more likely to sort of disregard your feelings about somebody or some situation in order to sort of just get the job done? Now, of course, you're not completely ignoring all your feelings. You're not antisocial, anything like that. But just, all things being equal, you're willing to, work with somebody that you don't like just to get the job done. Or you're willing to interact with somebody when you'd rather not, or go to the Grammys, even though it's against your personal value system? Or are you somebody who's more like an INFP, where it's just like you would not be caught dead doing anything that you don't want to do? And, there might be all the practical reasons in the world, and you might be giving up fame and a career for your values, but you would much rather do that than, quite frankly, sell out, right? Sell out your values and accommodate others when you know what they're doing, or like in your heart of hearts, is wrong, right? uh, again, Sinead's the classic INFP, probably INFP supercharged. Like, I don't think all INFPs are as, committed to the cause as she is, but, hey, she was in a position where she could be committed to the cause, and she did it. And to her credit, she kind of went back and forth on different issues, but you always knew she was being true to what she believed and what she thought, and was being authentic. And yeah, she might have developed, or you know a different view of things, or or maybe a more nuanced view of different things, but she still, you know in her mind, was sticking to what she felt was true. And again, you're going to see that a lot in the INFP artists, the Radioheads, the REMs, the people where you're just not going to. Kurt Cobain from Nirvana is probably an INFP, right? Like, classic, like, the Nirvana was like at the height of the entertainment field, and they were the biggest band, the biggest entertainers out there in the world. They were on TV, radio, magazines, and they had this magazine shoot with Rolling Stone, and Kurt Cobain is wearing a T-shirt that says, what does it say? Corporate magazines still suck. Right? On the front of Rolling Stone, he's basically telling them, like, yeah, I'm going to take your stupid pictures, but you still suck. Right? That is an INFP thing. And if you're an INFJ, you probably see that and you chuckle a little, but you also kind of roll your eyes. Right? And that's what I'm talking about, where yeah, you get it. You get, those values, but come on, right? Do you really have to put them in our face all the time? Is somewhat of an INFJ reaction. We're much more understanding than probably any other type, but we still kind of roll our eyes, right? Um, okay. And still kind of see it as, not really childish, but, sort of like the criticizing parent, like, really, do you need to be acting like that? um okay, hope this helps. Happy to discuss. Feel free to leave a comment, anything like that, and I will see you next time. Thanks.